Hi there, and welcome to another edition of The Interview. I'm Hiten Samtani with The Real Deal, and today I'm joined by Teri Rogers. Teri is the founder and CEO of Brick Underground, which is, I don't know how best to describe it. Probably her description is the one I'm going to use, which is Brick Underground is your daily survival guide for buying, selling, renting, and living in New York City. It's something I've been wanting to talk to you about for a while, but as this pandemic sort of grew in intensity and in duration, I thought that the entire market must have been, turned on its head. A lot of what was desirable about New York is no longer desirable, at least in the short term. But let's start with something that I noticed on your website. So I went on yesterday, and I periodically am on there, and I noticed this vertical called Escape. So,
laden with new meaning now.
please talk to me about that and what that means in a time like this.
The vertical covers everything from second homes, people getting second homes in the Catskills or the Hamptons, to securing that summer rental, what to watch out for, how to negotiate, how to work with a broker, our usual stuff, but just for that vacation or second home. Right now it's a little more eye-catching. I actually should check the traffic of that vertical to see if people are clicking on it.
I was going to ask if that is sort of the homepage now, basically.
In the first month of the pandemic, our sort of de facto homepages were the articles we have on how to get out of your lease or how to renegotiate your rent with your landlord. As a lot of people were instantly impacted by the shutdown and lost work.
Right. I mean, that's incredible and so sad to hear. When we think of New York City and we think about living in New York City, we think about density and we think about the joys of density and the struggles of density too. But being on top of one another is kind of the magic of living in New York, and the reason that people want to be there. That whole value proposition now is kind of has to be questioned. So, what are you seeing on each tier of the market?
I think most people who could afford to and had a place they wanted to go have left temporarily.
Okay.
Some probably won't come back if they were already on the verge of it and already thinking about making a move. But
so that exodus that we've been hearing about of the rich and the well-to-do, that is actually happening. That is something that you're seeing in terms of reader interest and questions.
Well, you're seeing it in terms of everything. I mean, I'm not sure if you saw the reporting on the garbage tonnage pickup from the Upper East Side or West Side dropped by 30%. And that's consistent. I mean, I lived for 2 months until last week on the Upper West Side, and we were 2 blocks from Central Park. Central Park was a paradise. Even though you could hear sirens, there were no tourists. And it just wasn't particularly crowded except for on the most beautiful afternoons.
Right.
People wouldn't come there by subway, obviously, so you had to live nearby. And the neighborhood was quiet. It was abnormally quiet.
I asked my reporters, I mentioned I'll be speaking with you, and they said, what happens with the entire co-op process, which you guys cover quite a bit. So co-ops are notoriously, stuffy is the polite way to say it, about who they let in and how the process works. Have they been more open and accepting of things like virtual interviews, and how is the co-op world adjusted to this?
So there's a couple of ways. So I'm on my co-op board, and we did do our first virtual interview, which I think was fantastic because we interviewed the applicant in her apartment, and she was lovely. And we could see her apartment and saw how she lived, and saw that she had a surfboard propped up in the corner, and that matched with her letter. And I think we got such an enormous level of comfort seeing who she was in her real life than if she had come to us all dressed up and nervous and sad.
Oh, interesting.
So I think that should be something that's here to stay. Our board is and was very concerned about the economic impact on potential buyers. So it's a question: does this person's how COVID vulnerable is this person's job?
Okay.
Have they had a salary cut? What's happened to their reserves? So I think it's going to make it harder to buy in a co-op for some people. Honestly, if you can see how they live, and like I talked to another board president, he's like, yeah, it was great. I got to see how they treated their kids because their kids wandered in. I got to see how they were with their dog.
And these are all observations that can factor into the decision, right?
Well, it just gives you a feeling of comfort that everything's aligned.
What other big trends have you seen that you think maybe are here just for the short term, and then are actually going to be,
I think
standard?
a lot of the things in virtual closings, thank God, will become more widely adapted, because there's nothing more awful than sitting for 6 hours in a depressing conference room waiting for the managing agent's person to bring keys or whatever it is, whatever's been forgotten. So to the extent we can move all of that online, that's going to be great. And I don't know why we wouldn't.
Well, there was a March order from Governor Cuomo, which kind of allowed digital, I guess, virtual notaries, right? And that was a big thing, right?
Yeah.
Has that had a big impact on the market and transactions?
Well, there aren't so many transactions going on. And, obviously, because you can't show, everything's sort of frozen right now. So the ones that were sort of in progress when the shutdown happened are going on, and they're being done if they're closing largely virtually. So yeah, that's been important.
What other tech do you think is
well,
really-
the virtual listings, the virtual tours? I think those will and should stay, because it helps a lot for people to narrow down their choices. As you've probably been hearing, they're most useful in actually consummating a transaction sight unseen in real life. For rentals, it's very hard for a buyer to plunk down all that money without actually seeing an apartment.
That's just because of the stakes involved, do you think?
Stakes, yeah, I think so. And also because your horizon as a renter is so much shorter. It's like, okay, if I have an air shaft in my bedroom, that's a year's problem. Whereas if you're a buyer, that not only is like a 5-year problem or 7-year problem, but it could impact your resale values.
I don't know if you have yet, but if you've seen any changes in terms of the patterns of renewing, are people staying put longer, either because they can't afford to up trade now, or there's too much uncertainty, or they're too scared of moving? Have you seen any of that? I feel like you guys function almost like the agony aunt of the New York City residential market.
Yeah.
And I want to understand some of the key issues.
Well, we do get a lot of reader questions, and then we can tell a lot by the traffic to certain posts, because 80% of our traffic comes through organic search. So I think one of our big hits, which usually is, but it was maybe bigger than normal, was how to negotiate a lease renewal. So, people obviously, they didn't want to go shopping around for an apartment, and they just want a better rent. And are
landlords typically making those concessions right now? Like if it's a 10% or 15, no, 15 might be too much, but like a 10%.
I think it's landlord by landlord. What they're not doing is in the middle of a lease, dropping the rent.
Let's talk a little bit on the sales side. In terms of the conversations that people are having or asking you about, have the priorities changed in what they're looking for in a home?
Well, I would say our number one in-market buyer pieces that has surfaced, that people are searching for and finding, is how to buy a penthouse, or all about, like, people are looking for that bubble, right?
Okay.
The penthouse and our brownstone townhouse content.
Okay.
So if you have the money, that's what you're looking for.
So you're trying to get
outdoor space, something. Oh, and we also had another one on, which is kind of informational on how does it work when you have an elevator entering your apartment or something, or a private elevator, something like that. But it was, again, the implication to me, or the inference, was that people were looking for their own private experience where they didn't have to mingle germs with other people. What's concerning me right now, if I were on the industry side, is, as you said, the value proposition, I think particularly of renting here, is just not going to work for the next year. And it's a short-term problem. It's a 12 to 24-month problem, but shoehorning 4 people into a flex 2-bedroom,
right?
All the buildings in Murray Hill that are for like the post-college crowd, where you already had rush hour waits for the elevators, and now you can only put one person in the elevator, and you're living with 3 strangers with varying degrees of conservatism about their health.
I was thinking of the mattress getting jammed into the elevator, the bike coming in, random people. Part of the magic of being there in New York, but that's so where would they go? I mean, universities are going. So have you thought about the education side of this? So universities are going to be virtual, many of them for quite a while. Some are opening classes back on campus. Some are saying your next semester is going to be virtual, which would have a big effect on the rental crowd in particular areas, right? In the village,
absolutely,
and places like that.
Yeah, I mean, and you have to now, as you know, look for if you're a renter, for sure, you have to look for a place that you can live in 24/7. And our apartments, unless you're very wealthy, are not designed to live in 24/7.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that we've seen is that it's your well-being was relatively maintained when you only had to be in your apartment
Yes.
7 hours a day, but now it's really dawning on people. Wow, the space thing might be important.
I just remember one of the other greatest hits right now during COVID is how to kick out your roommate in terms of
tell me about that.
Can you imagine being 4 people in basically a 1-bedroom, working and living 24/7?
I was thinking the best example I think of is if you got bit by a dog as a kid, right? That fear of dogs last for years. It doesn't go away, when you're dealing with another more gentle dog. It sticks around for a long time. And given the length of what we've been through, which is 3 months and counting, I feel like there might be some long-term behavior shifts in terms of.
So think about Katrina and how much more coastal development there has been since then, and how much money people are spending on those. Think about 9/11 and all the people living right down there again. Everybody, it came back. People have short memories. And the opposite end, I remember when I was first covering real estate for the Times, and all the tax abatements on new condos were so popular. And I remember talking, I think it was to Michael Chabot, I'm like, how I can see I had an attorney help me figure out what the carrying costs would be in 10 years or 15 years. And like, it's going to be whatever it was, $6,000 a month on a 2-bedroom. And I was like, how are people buying this? And he was just, I can't remember, he had a well-worded answer, but it was literally people just don't think further ahead.
They're just thinking about that little block where they save money, and then it's someone else's problem.
I was trying to think of like winners and losers in terms of, obviously, in terms of real estate and aspects of real estate. So for example, all of a sudden elevators, certainly for renters, in the next 12 to 24 months are going to be under a microscope. My co-op is a small pre-war co-op with a tiny elevator that's very stuffy.
Is it one of those?
I never really, no, it's not quite like that, but I never really cared. It was just like not impressive, but it never was a factor in my mind. Believe me, it was on my mind this entire time as I went up and down in it. But places with washer dryers, pet friendly, bikes have become much more important. For a renter, I don't think they're going to pay up for the luxury buildings that have all those indoor amenities, which are not going to be that usable for the next year, and that have relentlessly, value engineered the apartments so that, you can't move with your
and the landlords have made such giant bets in those buildings, right? Like they've amenitized the hell out of them. They're just like these giant, like cities almost.
I know, I agree. And I think if I were a landlord, and I haven't talked to anybody about this, but what I would do right now is focus on offering the most flexibility that they can in leasing. So if I was a renter, I don't know if I'm having a job in 3 months or 6 months. What I want is a 6-month lease with a 30-day cancellation after that.